We'll now begin our questioning, and I'd like to start with Ms. LaValle. Under the proposed rule with packer-to-packer affiliates, there would be a ban in terms of the selling. In your case, that would be very problematic, obviously, since you have a producer-owned packaging plant and also produce livestock. Therefore, you wouldn't be able to sell livestock to your own packing plant. What would that mean for your business?
Well, we could continue to sell to our own packing plant. Our 6 families market about 1/3 of the cattle through the homestead meats, through the packing plant that we own. But what it would hinder is our ability to sell to another packer. Mm-hmm. That's what it would hinder. So our other 2/3 of all the families, of the 6 families, would then be restricted in who they could market their cattle to. It takes buyers out of the market. And again, that would be a detriment to producers across the economy, especially us and other packing cooperatives, premium beef, Oregon country beef, all of those that are in a similar situation.
You know, you mentioned in your testimony that this is going to create new paperwork and increase costs. Do you have any idea how much this is going to increase your costs?
When we've looked at the proposed regulation, again, we have 13 employees. Now, that does not consider all the 6 families. And certainly that's a great question. We have not done an in-depth analysis to say that it was going to cost us another $2 a hundredweight or anything like that. We do know that it would take another half-time person to comply with this regulation. That's approximately $30,000 to $40,000 additional to our operating cost for our packing plant. And we only, again, have 13 employees to begin with.
So you're a wealthy small business. You can afford that, surely.
We operate on a pretty slim margin.
I know you do. So, as you pointed out in your testimony, Ms. LaValle, that for years the federal government has pushed farmers and livestock operators to become more actively involved in value-added downstream economic activities as a means of being extreme. It seems to be problematic since you're a producer-owned packing plant and also produce livestock. Really, sorry, I got lost on my paper here. In terms of going downstream, are you going to be able to maximize the value of your business? Is this going to be hitting you in the pocketbook and possibly creating job loss for you if this rule goes through?
Again, when I look at the in-depth analysis of this proposed regulation, and Mr. Chairman, I look at the unintended consequences, and I don't, yes, it has an impact on our business. Yes, it has an impact on our 6 families and our 6 ranches, but it also has a huge impact on the beef industry across whether it's just our area or across the country. Again, increased government intervention, increased potential litigation. Mm-hmm. All of these factors have a trickle-down effect to where there is a reduction in the price and an increase in the operating cost. And again, in this era of very slim margin, increased cost and decreased revenue is never good for any producer of any size, whether it's small, medium, or large.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Malinke, you mentioned in your testimony that you have arrangements with a number of producers that raise hogs for niche markets, which requires producers to follow a very specific growing protocol. If the GIPSA rule is implemented as written, do you feel that an incentive exists for these producers to undertake the added expense in following these protocols, and if they aren't guaranteed a premium for the added value?
Clearly these growers aren't going to raise pigs with the protocol that really ultimately these consumers have set forth. In other words, it's the consumer saying, hey, this is what we want and this is why we want it. So it's flowing backwards. And if they're not assured of a premium, they simply won't do it.
Do you feel that by guaranteeing every producer base pay, that the quality of livestock available to consumers, that will decrease? Is that what I'm hearing?
I believe it would be that case, definitely.
Great. Mr. Brandenberger, you mentioned in your testimony a provision in the proposed rule that would allow a grower to recover 80% of the cost of the required capital investment. Do you think that given the margins, small integrators may find it difficult to make such assurances?
I think that's a potential problem. I mean, in reality, in the overwhelming majority of the cases, that investment in our industry at least is going to be recouped and then some. It's going to happen. Usually for new growers, fairly long-term contracts are offered. We have relatively small turnover rates among our growers. It's the problem of once you put that risk in writing on the line, you assume that risk by guaranteeing it. In essence, that's part of your contracts. How do the lenders, how do the people that help finance the companies, our industry, how are they going to look at that? How is that going to affect their ability, their willingness to make some investments that are going to be important? And for our companies, at that point, if you're going to offer these guarantees in writing, that's part of your business obligation. Which growers are you going to choose to do that with, and do you start making some very hard decisions that may affect some growers whose performance is far from poor, but who may not meet the criteria necessary to survive in this new higher risk world? So
it'll impact smaller growers.
Smaller growers, or and growers that for whom the investment might be a bigger stretch, and may have a little bit larger risk because of a variety of factors. Yes, that's what concerns growers a little bit, is what's going to happen when my contract's renewed. They want to make this investment. If this is a guarantee, where am I going to fall in that new world?
Okay, great. And Mr. Junkin, your testimony it indicates that you agree with GIPSA and their proposal to remove the tournament pay system for poultry contractors. Smaller growers raise their flocks to meet certain requirements using different diet formulas and creating a niche market for their unique birds. If the growers know that they're going to be receiving the same base pay as another grower who doesn't follow the same requirements, these birds that could be of a lesser quality, where's the incentive for growers to continue to grow and produce these consumer-driven birds?
Well, like I was saying, number one, they can...
Want to hit your microphone, please? Thanks.
Well, first off, the contractors can still pay premiums and for better quality or better performing animals. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But could you repeat the last part of that question that you asked?
Yeah, what it is, where is the incentive for growers to continue to produce the consumer-driven birds?
Well, right now, as far as the small producers, because I think you were making a relationship to the smaller producers at the same time. Right now, the smaller producer doesn't have a lot of options in the first place because he's already being penalized. Secondly, in the poultry industry, most of the birds and the feed is already owned by the contractor. The farmer's basically providing the building which the birds are housed in.
But they're all receiving the same base pay. Going off.
Yes, and so what I'm trying to do is defend or define why we're supporting a base pay structure versus whatever the contractor wants to pay. I mean, the bottom line right now, it's a take it or leave it contract. If you, as the poultry grower, is sitting there with a 30-year mortgage after you made the improvements, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there saying, okay, it's time to renew the contract, and here's what we're going to pay for the birds or for your production on the birds, but you don't have the opportunity to negotiate the price, who's setting the market then? And that comes back to, what is the real value of that bird? And how does the producer have the opportunity to determine that without being able to negotiate with that contractor in a good, faithful way? Any other contracts, we have the opportunities to, if we feel that we've been unduly adjusted as far as fairness or whatnot, the ability to negotiate or
do you see, I guess the point I'm trying to get at is where you have the same base pay that's going to be put into place. I'm having a hard time really understanding that distinction. Shouldn't there be?
There's still value to that bird. I mean, it's just like in the cattle industry. I may have a different size hog or a heavier hog versus an ideal hog. I could have a steer that is the ideal weight and the ideal size, and it might be the ideal breed that doesn't have the big bone where you're going to have a lot of waste. but that animal is still valued at the same base price. It's at the same starting number. Whatever, it's still there. It still has that value. That's what we're trying to say is make it more balanced on that base price. If it's a higher quality animal, pay the premium. Nobody's saying that they can't, but we want to know as a grower, what is that base price going to be when we're starting to enter into these contracts? And then it should not be penning one producer against another producer.
Okay. Mr. Brandenberger, do you have some comments maybe?
Well, there's one thing that's mentioned a lot, and I know Mr. Junk hears it a lot from the people he talks to, is the question of inputs. And you sometimes hear talk about there are the poults, which are our baby turkeys or chicks that they receive of varying qualities. Now, a live animal isn't something you can rubber stamp, but in the turkey industry at least, an important thing to know is that the genetic lines are managed almost entirely by two primary breeders that operate in the United States. They're the ones that produce the genetic lines that the processors use. They spend tens of millions of dollars to create as much uniformity between each poult that's delivered, as do the hatchery owners who hatch the poults and get them out there. Their businesses suffer if the processors start seeing that any percentage of these poults are substandard, aren't performing. And there's no percentage in sending substandard poults onto any farm, because with the high feed costs we have today, and we could talk about other government policies, but we'll let it go for this point. With the high feed costs we have today, no processor is going to continue buying and sourcing poults and sending them to growers if they're not getting maximum feed efficiency off of that birds. So there's already an enormous economic disincentive for any substandard poult to be delivered to any farm with any degree of regularity.
Okay, great. Just follow up one other question there, Mr. Junk. In terms of your organization, do you have any fears that the competitive injury provisions in the rule, along with provisions banning the use of tournament systems to rank growers and the requirements that growers recoup their investment in new barns and housing, will lead to some processors restricting all their future contract buying only to the most successful growers, or even doing all of their own growing in-house, reducing the number of opportunities for other growers, including beginning growers?
Was you saying fairs?
Yeah. No, when we're talking about the competitive injury provisions in the rule,
okay,
is this going to be restricting some of these opportunities for growers to be able to develop and actually closing down the market?
Myself personally, no. I don't think it will. If anything, it gives, the producers the opportunity to have an opportunity to identify and be able to access justice for their probable cause. Mm-hmm. And so, no, I do not see this causing any problems within the industry. As far as the producers, for the last, I was president of the Pennsylvania Farmers Union back in the late 80s and 90s. And these are some of the same problems that we had back then that we've been trying to address and bring concerns to. The consolidation of the industry today has been growing bigger and bigger. And our concern is no different than any other industry's concern. When does it get too big to fail? And right now, what we're looking at is make sure we have a fair, balanced opportunity to access the market and provide competitive pricing.